Hey, good people. Grits or cream of wheat? Who the hell is racist? Does anyone ever ask if they touch your hair?
Black Like Me.
You're listening to Black Like Me with Dr. Alex G., a podcast that invites you to experience the world through the perspective of one black man, one conversation, one story, or even one rant at a time. Here's Dr. G.
Black Like Me.
Hey, Black Like Me podcast family. It's Dr. Alex G. I want to shout out two new Patreon members, Brian Levendale. We went to high school together. We didn't really know each other, but we've become reconnected through adult life, middle-aged life, and but another activist in the community who's just committed to seeing to it that Madison becomes a fairer and more equitable place. Thank you for your support. And Dan Group, I appreciate you and your nice note as well. Listen, folks, we can do great things together. And so please click on the link to go to the Patreon page and consider becoming one of our supporters. And if you support us at a $6 level a month or higher, I get to shout your name out. Hey, listen, you're in for a treat today. I love sitting in the studios with Dr. Lyiscott. She's a scholar and an activist, a thought leader and a writer and a poet. And her work just encourages me so much. I love her sense of cultural intuitiveness and pride and how it motivates her work. And as she talks about being unapologetically Black and committed to the things that strengthen Black people. Before we get into her excellent interview, I want you just to get a little peek, a little taste at her poetic skills. She's going to read an excerpt from her book that's called The Politics of Ratchetness.
The politics of ratchetness. Wretched. Just wretched. Ratchet. Mad ratchet, yo. You, with your pants sagging low, like our hope in an American dream. You, with your loud ratchet self, neck twisting and turning like the Nile, mouth smacking, hands clapping with every word. You, with your skin so obscenely and unapologetically Black, an onyx opulence, an ontological odyssey, thick like the night, black that blinds, boogie man Black. You, with your Skittles and whatever is left of your spine, with your hands up, with your toy gun. You, with no arms because they are cuffed behind your back, and no arms because the threat of you lived only in their minds. You, with no breath because it has been stolen from your lungs. You, with your ghetto, violent, unruly, thuggish, ratchet self, wretched self, yo. I love you.
I'm really excited about today's interview, today's discussion. I'm meeting with Dr. Jamila Lyiscott. She's the author of the recently published book, Black Appetite, White Food. And I had a good time reading this. And just want to tell you a little bit about her, that she's a social justice education scholar, nationally acclaimed speaker, spoken word artist, and educational consultant. You don't usually see all of that in the same lineup. I really appreciate that. She serves as the assistant professor of social justice education at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst, where she's also the co-founder and director of the Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research. She holds an appointment also as a senior research fellow within the Teachers College of Columbia University's Institute for Urban and Minority Education. And she's in our fair city of Madison, Wisconsin, to bring some of her brilliance and her insight. And I have the opportunity, the great fortune to be able to sit down and talk with her. So Dr. Lyiscott, welcome to Madison and welcome to Black Like Me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I'm so glad. I'm so glad to have you here. I love your book. I've got some questions for you, some discussions for you. But on Black Like Me, we always open up with Black icebreakers. And so,
Okay.
And they're not meant to trap you or anything.
Am I gonna get my black card?
No. We do not revoke black cards. You know what I do find is that I've got to adjust this for young people because you write older than you look, than you are. I mean, so you drop such profundity when you're writing. And so when I saw you, I was like, She's so young. I had something that's pictured. Yes. So some of these might be old. So if you could just say, that's for your generation.
Beyond my years.
Okay, so I'll just ask you some of the basic ones: grits or cream of wheat?
Grits.
Grits. Okay, all right.
Definitely.
Now, do you like grits with salt, sugar?
Salt.
Salt, no sugar. So,
I like
man.
cheesy grits.
You like cheese? Okay, I got you. If you're gonna
Yeah.
do cheesy ones, okay, you got to do that. Let's see. These are some interesting things. When you were growing up, did you ever receive what I called a syllable spanking? Like when your parents are like, didn't I tell you not to? And people call them different things, but you got some of those.
I got Caribbean parents. My mom, yep, it happened.
Really? So she'll be explaining the whole process to you.
The whole thing, just like letting me know syllable by syllable what I really need to be thinking about in this moment.
Oh my goodness! Now, when you were growing up, did you have play cousins that maybe later on in life you found out, wow, they're not blood cousins, but they're play cousins?
You know what? The way I grew up, everybody in the community was like family.
Really?
Right? Like, so my church community and my home community, same thing. Like, everybody was your cousin, everybody was your family, and still to this day, a lot of those bonds are still in place.
Wow. So you talked about growing up in church. Did older people put their finger up? Is that a black church thing? Is that a Caribbean church thing? Did people hold their index finger up as they were walking?
Is that a Black American church thing?
It might be a Black American church thing.
I don't think it's a Caribbean church thing.
You know what? You're probably right.
They hold their hands up, but the finger up, like the Medea-esque.
Yeah, the Medea-esque. That's exactly what it is.
I think that's more like Black American.
Yeah, it probably does come back to plantation stuff.
My church was very Caribbean.
No, I got you. Hey, when you were growing up, did you have to perform Easter speeches in church or holiday speeches? Did families like kind of push you up front to do things?
You know what? I was always responsible for the poems.
So this goes way back. You've been a poet your whole life.
Yeah, I've been a poet. I think I wrote my first poem when I was like 10. And then like when my church community got wind that I could string a couple words together and it could rhyme, then every event, everything.
So you were a laureate before you even realized. You were like we did have those church laureates, people who would deliver poems on occasion.
Yeah, that's what it was pretty much.
Oh my goodness. Have any of your white associates at the university level ever asked or tried to touch your hair?
Thank God, no.
What? Really?
Thank God. It's been 3 years, and I'm so grateful that hasn't happened.
Have you seen it in their eyes like they wanted to? Can you can follow people's eyes? Like, can you see them look at you, look at your hair, look at your hair?
I know that, especially because I have dreads. I know that. And like when my dreads are not braided, they're loosed out, and I know it's very different for them. But I'm grateful. Thank you to my dope white colleagues who have not crossed that line. I appreciate that deeply.
Oh no, I love it. Now I want to see if this is just a Black American thing. How did your parents or grandparents? What was their treatment for getting a fish bone that was stuck in someone's throat? Is that? Am I showing? Is that one of the age ones? Like if you're eating fish and you accidentally swallow a bone, like old school people used to have a method for doing that.
They just hack it out.
They just hack it.
Yeah. What
old folks used to give you white bread, like that thick Wonder Bread. I think the pressure of it and the gumminess of it could kind of push the bone.
A little bit above me.
That might be a little older. That was a nice way of saying that, Dr. Lyiscott. That was a nice way of saying that.
I try to say it in a kind way.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Let me think. No, that's good. That's good. I appreciate that. What's so interesting is the majority of our listeners are non-Black. Mm-hmm. Because they listen for resources to understand things that they haven't fully figured out, or to rethink things that they have mislearned or misunderstood. Okay. And so they're always shocked that there are things that we hold in common. I mean, you're certainly younger than I am. You come from a Caribbean experience and background, church and family, but yet you understood syllable speaking. It was something very different. Yeah. And it just shows the strength of our culture. So people often comment that they're amazed that there's so many things that Black people from the diaspora hold in common, even though we didn't grow up in one single community. And I love that. So when I hear people being able to connect with the stories and the questions, it just strengthens the fact that because our lives were so disruptive, we learned how to build culture and family and community wherever we landed. Right. And I love being able to see the commonalities that we hold.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
I really have enjoyed reading your book, Black Appetite, White Food. So let me just first of all just ask off the bat. That's a great title, but what made you think about that as a title? Because this is really speaking to educators. It's applicable anywhere, right. But you're really talking about how you're helping people to think about their white pedagogy. So tell me a little bit about the title.
So I'm going to say first that I'm a poet, so I'm not going to fully give you everything.
Okay, I got you.
Because I really love for you know, the poetics to be open to interpretation.
Sure.
But I will say that Frantz Fanon's Black Skin, White Mask was very much a heavy influence. Like just even before I engaged with that text, the title of that just spoke volumes. Like just the title spoke volumes to my experience, and just wanting to honor that. And then there's some other influences, but for the most part, the goal of the title is really to confront us with the reality that whiteness is pervasive. Yes. In a way that stifles even what we are craving as a society. And I am black, a black woman, and I begin with blackness, but it's not limited to blackness. So just what does it mean for whiteness to always be essentially, you know, forced upon us in ways that we don't even always see because it's so normalized, but our appetites are so complex, and we know our brilliance and our value in the world, actually, especially when it comes to black culture, just like has a deep appetite for black culture. Right. Like it's the mass appeal and the way that we just exist in the world is so powerful, yet that appetite is starved in the service of sustaining like white supremacist ideologies and frameworks and standards and norms. So I just wanted to play around with that tension and just be in conversation with a lot of amazing scholars, including Frantz Fanon, who've done this work. I'm just trying to join them and amplify the message.
Sure. I love that. I was impressed by the fact that you're in schools. You've done over 100 presentations. You have a TED Talk that you've given. And to the extent that we're able to do so, I want to put links to all of those things, including how to purchase your book. I love to put all of that in the podcast so people can continue to experience you and your thoughtfulness.
Yeah, much appreciated.
Sure. I'll tell you what really jumped out at me is how you disarmed the reader right from the beginning. You said, okay, I'm a bad scholar. I'm a bad activist. You start explaining these things, and it was almost like you wanted to say all the stuff that people would think about your writing. You know, you said, okay, I'm a scholar, but I'm also working in the community, and I'm not going to narrowly define white privilege for you because I want you to be able to work those things out and talk those things out as well. But you just explained to people that I'm going at this based upon what I've seen, what I've experienced, what the pedagogy is, how we're trained, and I want you to go on this journey with me. But I just love the way you laid it all out and explained to them, you're not about to put me in a box. Yeah. I'm going to write in a style and use the vernacular that's most appropriate. I'm here to help you. You're not here to help me. I'm not writing this so you all can critique my thought on this. I'm trying to help you all, white community, think more broadly about your actions. And I just thought that was just not only was it brilliant, but it was brave, but it was such a great tactic for disarming people, because I live in a college community where one mistake in grammar or punctuation can cause people just to shut down on the whole argument. And so did you know you were going to open up that way to disarm folks, or did you write the book and then come back and say, you know what, let me just disarm people?
You know what it was? There was a period of time when I was like ducking and hiding from my editor because, deadlines. Sure. And I was like,
I started sweating when you said deadline.
Yeah, like, because it just, the book was in my spirit. I didn't know how to get it out.
Sure.
And so I was sitting in the complexity of that. And I recalled being inspired by Dr. Roxane Gay, who speaks about being a bad feminist. Mm-hmm. And I realized that, especially in the academy, the work is so predatory, right? It's like literally people, it's almost like a settler colonial mindset. Like, I need to disrupt and abolish what you've done in order to settle and create and establish my name in your place. And this kind of ideology, and even now in cancel culture and the kind of world we're living in, where everybody's just shutting everybody down all day.
Right.
I was like, wait a minute. If I have a message and I know that my message and my calling is bigger than this academy in the first place, like, I just want to open with authenticity. And so I knew it was returning to the work after having gone through several drafts where I was essentially like performing a book, right? Like, I was writing the book that I thought sounded like a book.
Right.
And then when I returned to the work, I said, if I'm going to do this, I have to do it authentically and in alignment with who I am, because that's who I am. Like, that's what I'm known for. That's how I resonate with people, by just being me.
Right.
And so I just wanted to name that and give people the freedom. Since the moment that I shipped that manuscript off, there were 5 million other things that, you know, I thought about, that shifted, that, you know, so life is moving, life is living, I'm evolving constantly. And so I just wanted to be very clear, like, this is me in a particular moment, entering a conversation that's very complex, and we're all trying to understand and unlearn and relearn, you know. So I think we need to be open to that as a society.
Sure.
So it was important for me to invite, not necessarily like to say like I'm helping you, so to speak, but like let's understand that about each other.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Let's be in community with each other, and with the understanding that we're all incomplete, and that if we have shared values, then cool, I'm gonna bang with you. We could roll with this, right? And that's really what I was trying to establish up front.
Well, I think you established it really well. You know, it makes me think that if a scientist, let's say if someone were an oncologist, but they also had dealt with cancer and overcome it, their experiences would weave into their lectures.
Absolutely.
But when you have someone who's a scholar, who also has lived experience as an African American female, as a black female living in America with Caribbean roots, if you don't bring that to the table, you cheat the reader and you cheat yourself.
Yeah.
And so often I feel like we have to apologize to bring all of us to the table. So I feel that when you stated that, you just made it very clear. You lay down your credentials, because that's important as we work cross-culturally. You know, we can have an earned doctorate, but white folks still want to know, where did you get that? And what department? You know, almost want you to validate your background and experiences. So the fact that you established yourself as a scholar, but brought your lived experience and perspective to the table as being equally powerful and valid, I think gave people more than what they're bargaining for.
And that's really important to me, because the way that it's another feature of this like Eurocentric Western like white middle class values to need to authenticate myself with some kind of institution.
Right.
The things that authenticate me don't have anything to do with the academy. It has nothing to do with my institutional affiliations. It has everything to do with the fullness of who I am and my worth beyond anything. Right. And so I want to invite that too. Important. And I try to invite the academy to disrupt that. It's a part of what I do in my work, period, where I'm like, I'm not going to be put in this box where you think that because I have 3 letters behind my name that makes me valid. That's ridiculous. Or
different from your colleagues.
Exactly. And so, and then for people like for me, you know, for people in my community, it's the same thing, right? It's not about saying that you become your worth is not tethered to any of these degrees, to any of these labels, to this upward mobility that we kind of have in our capitalist society. No, your worth is just fundamental to your humanity. And when you bring your full humanity to anything, that's when it has power.
Definitely.
You know, and that disrupting that is very, very important to me.
Definitely. You know, I'm thinking about my daughter who's a graduate student. Even myself, I studied at the University of Wisconsin, Madison here for my undergrad. And I think I may have had 3 black professors in my whole career. And one of my majors was African American history.
Wow.
The chair of the department and my advisor was a white man. And so I'm just thinking about how I would have engaged the information and thought about myself if I had young, thoughtful, authentic academicians in the classroom talking about the text, but also their lived experiences. Because I think when I was at school in the early 80s, we did have the black scholars, but not all of them knew or were comfortable bringing themselves, because sometimes when we do that, people say that that's inappropriate. My sister's a social worker, and she works with black women who are surviving from sexual abuse and sexual assault. But she tells her story of living through incest by our stepfather. But she's often told in white women's spaces, well, we don't train our leaders to do that. We want you to separate your own piece out.
Yes.
Or in preaching, black preaching is you bring your story in. So I talk about my fatherlessness when I'm preaching, whereas my white colleagues may not do that. And so there is a part of us that is confident enough in what authenticity looks and feels like, which is why we want to bring ourselves to the table. And it's not just being emotional or whatever, however it's worded. We bring those things to the table because we know that it gives us authenticity, and authenticity brings power.
Exactly.
And that power changes mindsets and attitudes. And so the students you have, the folks you're working with, are really blessed, because it would have been great to have young faculty guiding me in my thought as I was entered college as a 17-year-old, I could have related much better than I did. I had good teachers, but I could have related much better than someone closer to my age and my own lived experiences.
Thank you.
There are a couple of things that jumped out at me in the book that I'd just like to just mention quickly or get your feedback on. But then I'd like to talk to you just about the reaction to the book. But I love your talk about false binaries, about we get stuck in either we do the analysis or the action, whether we're activists or theorists. And you basically debunked that and said, this is like, a table missing a leg, or so. You didn't use that analogy, but it's not going to stand fully. But I really appreciated that because, again, in an academic town, we get lost in the analysis and we get lost in the theory and thinking that alone is helping the problem. But to have the information and not act on it makes one part of the problem, correct?
Right, absolutely.
And so I appreciated that. But also, can we talk a little bit about the term, I think you quoted Yolanda Seeley Ruiz, the archaeology of self.
Yeah.
I just thought that was this sense of excavating who you really are.
Yeah.
Tell me just about how that phrase hit you when you read it and made you want to make mention of that.
I mean, Yolanda Seeley Ruiz, affectionately known as Yoli, is a mentor of mine. And, I'll allow her to speak to her work with the archaeology itself. But the question, like how it hit me.
Yes.
That hit me in a very personal way because in my own journey, a part of the authenticity that I bring is the awareness as an academic activist that I cannot exist in my full power in this work without doing the personal wellness piece, right? I realized that there was so much happening in publicly when it came to especially like the Black Lives Matter movement and a lot of social justice oriented work. And this outward work cannot be sustained without a true understanding of excavating who we are, our own psychosocial development, the ways that we've been shaped, the ways that these systems of power have impacted me as a person, lives in my body, lives in my family, lives in my history, lives in my spirit. I was just kicking it with some young people the other day. They blew my mind. This young woman opened up her question and she was like asking about racism, and she started off the question saying, since trauma lives in the DNA. I said, she's about 15 years old.
She said that.
She started off the question, since trauma lives in the DNA. I said, okay, well, we going there now, right? And it was real because you have to understand, like, we're not fighting against mechanisms of power that exist outside of us. But they live and breathe in us.
She was talking about epigenetic
She
trauma.
was talking about epigenetics.
Wow, at
like
15.
we had to go there. Like she was literally talking about epigenetics and epigenetics, quantum physics, these stuff got pushed on me as I realized my own personal healing, my own personal journey, a true vision of mapping out my family history as it relates to racism and economic oppression and gender oppression. I'm like, this is on me. Right?
And in you.
And in me in a way that I can't just fight without, I have to fight within, right?
Wow.
And so that journey has been so powerful that's how the archaeology of the self hit me. That I realized that we cannot, right? Like what the world outside of us is a reflection of the world inside of us. So if we're not good, like if we're really not good and we living in a deeply performative society.
Right.
We're living in a society where escapism is the norm.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of pain that's being numbed. There's a lot of trauma that's not being dealt with. If we're not good internally, we could never be good collectively, in community, and externally. And so as much as I understand my wellness to be bound up in yours, I realize that my private wellness is urgent to the cause of public justice.
That's powerful. That sounds like a poem in the making. And it also helps me to understand, particularly to our non-Black listeners, that sometimes when we, being Black people, will see each other, we'll say, "You good?" And we're not asking, "Is it cold? How's the weather today?" We're really asking you about how you're doing inside.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I was born in Chicago. I lived on the West Side, which is predominantly Black. My first grade class had a Black teacher She just turned 100 on Christmas. I still keep in touch with her.
Wow.
We've been pen pals. She just wrote me a note a few weeks ago. She's
At
been
100?
writing me. Yes.
Okay.
She's still wearing heels and hats and
What?
fur. Oh,
Okay.
I hadn't
sis.
seen her in years. I went to her daughter called me to come to a party. I was blown away. Beautiful.
Wow.
But she told me I was going to be the first black president in 1969. Because you make each kid stand up and say what they want to be. I didn't know. She suggested that on me. But pushed a sense of leadership that she saw that was affirming. But we moved to Madison, where I was one of 2 black kids, almost for my entire life. But I remember the other gentleman, Reggie, had a lot of behavioral problems. And it wasn't just that he was naughty. Looking back, he had some emotional issues. You know, like if someone picked on him, he couldn't bring the anger back in. It usually was goaded or prompted into something. He wasn't a bully, but if you pushed him, he couldn't get himself back together. And I was talking to my daughter about this. I don't know what triggered it. No one said it. There was nothing explicit. But from moving from Chicago and thinking I could be the first president who was black to second grade where it's all white, I somehow believed that white students were smarter than black kids. Nobody said it. Nobody said you're dumb. Nobody said those things. But I'm realizing that whether it's something that's in the DNA, something that's in the atmosphere, that when we come into some of these predominantly white spaces, there's this pervasive thought or attitude. Maybe it was the lack of just not seeing not a single black teacher in that school. No one on the chalkboard looking like me. No one in the literature looking like me. But I remember this slow sort of burn into my psyche that these kids were smarter. And so when we start talking about the trauma in our DNA or the things that try to pull us back, we're not just fighting against the spoken words, the burned crosses, the N-word while you go crossing the street. It's the inside stuff. What we're now understanding is that the pressure from those microaggressions are actually social determinants of health. That the city of Madison has determined that the kind of pressure, the epigenetic pressure we've been talking about, is considered a health risk, and it's causing many of our people to get sick earlier and die prematurely. So taking care of ourselves is really, really important. And that's why I think I love that concept of excavation of self, because if we don't take care of ourselves, we won't be around for the fight.
Yeah, I'm deep into like journeying into understand that it's tricky. So on the one hand, I'm trying to be increasingly intentional about not like centering trauma narratives when it comes to blackness.
Right.
You know, like
Sure.
making sure that the conversations we're having are centered on black power and black joy and black resilience and black futures, and simultaneously naming exactly what you just named.
Sure.
Right? Because the way that trauma is set up, you have to think about it. Like everything you just named, the spoken word, the burning crosses, the lynchings, witnessing death and horror and witnessing
Witnessing it.
and living in the fear and threat of that, trauma will encode itself into your like your brain, like the tissue of your brain, right? And it will encode itself into your DNA,
Right.
And so that can't be ignored, like that
Right.
that fear, that and so I'm deep into that right now because I just feel like it's a both and. It's like
Right.
acknowledging the power and at the same time doing the work, right? It's not that we're perpetual victims or cementing that
Right,
victimhood.
right.
But the work got to be done, because everything you just said is so true. It's also what you witnessed. That's a different kind of violence. Not seeing yourself represented at any institution,
Right.
especially in places of power. You internalize a message because that's what happens, right? Like if you witness at the institutional level, these are spaces where you're being socialized
Right.
as a young person.
Right.
You're internalizing whatever those messages are. Even if they're not spoken directly. And that's something we have to be very careful about.
I really appreciate what you're saying, because you named something that I experienced, the trauma of not seeing myself in places of learning, socialization, and power. If non-black people are going to be allies, they have to speak up to those very homogenous spaces as well. They have to understand that is definitely dangerous. And so if folks are going to be allies, they can't just say, it's tough to find diversity. It's too cold in Wisconsin. There's no community, so people they won't come here. White allies, non-black allies, are going to have to find ways to use their voices to speak up against these explicitly white spaces because of the impact it has, not only on them, but more importantly, on people of color.
Yeah, and so it's a couple things. Like the book is meant to speak to everybody, not just white people, everybody who's invested in this work. But what's important for the message, especially for your white listenership, is that the emotional labor and the psychological labor that comes with having to fight against racism is real.
Yes, it is.
And so if they don't take up that work, if they really want to ally themselves with us in this work, if they don't take up the work of disrupting their own communities, right? And speaking to people who will not hear us, and taking up, and not on their own accord, like being in community with us about what's needed.
Definitely.
Like if they don't do that work, and then they try to throw the labor on us to dismantle what they built, then that's just like,
while calling themselves woke because they know it's out there.
Like, that's not it.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's
it's complex, because at the same time, honestly, I don't want a whole bunch of white people trying to figure out how to fix racism all by themselves. Like, that ain't it.
Right.
But we have to
That's
be
a problem in and of itself.
Right. We have to be mindful about the way that the emotional and psychological labor plays out. And so what you're saying is just so real. Like, they would have to see it. The way that privilege is set up is what was jarring for you as a child, navigating a school space where you weren't represented, was the exact opposite experience for them.
Exactly.
They're represented everywhere.
Everywhere.
And so that discomfort doesn't exist. They just don't even have a lens for it. And there's a privilege in that. And often when we try to speak to that, it's just like, it misses them.
Completely.
And so that is part of where the conversation needs to open up. We are coming into this work and into this world with very different lenses.
Yes.
And we need to interrogate the lens with which we see the world.
Yes.
That's very much the beginning of the work in many ways.
Hi, this is Jeremy Holiday, and I'm one of the editors of the Black Like Me show, and I just want to take a minute now to talk to you a little bit about Patreon. The show that we put together here is the culmination of an effort of a lot of people, and in order to do it, we need your support. We've been working for a while to come up with a Patreon that works well for people, and the levels that existed before, we recently added the $2 level, which is there for you if you like the show and you just want to give a little bit of support. It's cheaper than a cup of coffee. I mean, I don't think you can find a cup of coffee anywhere, or half a cup of coffee for $2. And we have a $6 level where you'll get a shout out on the show, a $10 level where you could submit questions to Dr. G and he'll respond to them, and then the $25 level, which is whenever we have a live event, you get a VIP invite, and whenever we start producing merch, you get that merch as well. So if you like what you hear on the show and you want to support it, go to patreon.com/blacklikeme and check out the levels to see if one fits for you. Now back to Dr. G.
Growing up in a community like Madison, I can remember even, I'm showing my age, I was born in 63, but started Head Start in 67. It's one of the early Head Start kids in Chicago. But like even the Fun with Dick and Jane books, Salt and Pepper, all those things. I mean, it showed this normal suburban American society. Right. So my daughter's in library science school. She's getting her master's in that area. So I sent her a note that said that there's a library in Harlem that looked at all the most checked out books over the past 125 years. There's a book called Snowy Day. I might be butchering the name, but it was a black character. And I wrote my daughter, I said, baby, your grandmother gave me this book when I was a kid, or checked it out, because it was the first book I remember seeing that had a black character. And it was not about a black family in a snowstorm. It wasn't about black snowstorm. It was just about this cute little black boy in this snowstorm. And I loved it. So it's interesting that the first book I remember reading, she said, Dad, we just talked about that book in school. So I posted it and just said, when we don't have books like this, where black children of color just to get to be mainstreamed and talk about their lives, it has an impact on the black imagination.
Yes.
And so when I saw this cover, I had a visual reaction because I just said, wow, this takes me way back to how I felt when I read that. But a lot of my white friends posted and said, we read that too, because I think the underlying text or subtext was, that didn't just speak to black people, it spoke to all of us. And I didn't even notice that the character was black. But the point I was making was, I noticed that the character was black. Right. That's the point I was making. But people were so quick to say, I love the book too, but it wasn't important to me that the character was black. Means there's no way in hell they can be an advocate for racial justice because they're too busy, and they meant well, but they're too busy in their minds just trying to show that it was just a good book. It was good children's literature.
That's that colorblind
right,
racism.
Exactly, that the ethnicity of that child was incidental, but it's the most checked out book in Harlem's library for over 125 years. It's the most checked out. Somebody did that, not because they wanted to learn more about snow. Black people were checking that book out because they wanted their children to be able to read it. So people who want to lean in to the non-Black listeners, they've got to understand that pretending like these realities don't exist is not helpful. And bringing out the fact that that character was Black, that was very important to me as a Black kid. I couldn't articulate it, but again, when I just thought, well, let me just look at what this book is. And even though I could never have guessed the title, and I'd forgotten about the book, it was in my subconsciousness, but when I saw that little kid in a red snowsuit, I could remember it came out around the time of the big snowstorm in Chicago of '67. I can remember my school. I can remember Mrs. Turner. Like, all of these things just came back to me as this very vivid memory. But I never understood why it was so important to me until I found out how popular it was. And it was that I could identify with it.
Right.
Wow. I'm sorry. I'm having this discussion is helping me. I'm processing what it's like to be mid-50s and having been socialized in a context like Madison, so that when I begin to speak up, the response is not necessarily shut up or go back to Africa. I mean, I get a couple of those emails, but it really is, but Alex, we never saw you as Black. We just saw you as the captain of our track team, as being on our homecoming court. We just saw you, and in stating that, it reiterates some of the frustration of herein lies the problem.
Yeah, exactly.
I've got to bring in a question for you for my daughter, because she's a 23-year-old. She's a scholar. I've been talking to her about your book, and she loved the fact that you tie in Harry Potter.
Oh yeah.
Into this, and so your part where you say, and I haven't read any of the Harry Potter stuff, so I asked my daughter. Nah. I said, who the heck is Voldemort? Like, who is this? And so she laughed at me like, Dad, how could you not know this? But I love the analogy you made. You talked about him. You said his name. You said, "Oh, I mean white privilege." That was kind of funny. She got a kick out of that. So I said, honey, if you give me some good questions, I will give you credit for it. So she said, okay. So here's one of the questions she has.
Okay.
What is the connection between Death Eaters and white supremacy? And do you think J.K. Rowling, say, I'm so bad.
I think Rowling
could have done to resolve this? Does that question make sense? I don't even know what this question means.
I get it. The second part, what could she have done to resolve?
Yeah, but the big thing about
J.K. Rowling is real woke. Like, she be on it. So I know the second part of what she could have done to resolve this, I'm not sure. So the Death Eaters.
Yeah, the Death Eaters, and is there a connection?
Oh no, I get it.
Okay, really? So what is? Okay,
I'm gonna explain it to you. So,
okay, thank you.
So essentially, Voldemort is like a super troubled kid who grows up to want like a purist society. Mm-hmm. So he's not even pure blood as it's called.
Sure.
But there are some people who become magical beings. And they have just one magical parent or maybe both human parents. Mm-hmm. And there's a divide in the magical world where if you're not pure blood, meaning your entire family history is not purely magical, then you're seen as inferior, right? And so they have derogatory names for people like that. So
is that where mudblood comes in?
That's a mudblood. A mudblood is somebody. Is one of those derogatory names. And so, this is essentially holding up a mirror to our society. But ultimately, Voldemort gains enough power to bring people behind his movement, right? Like, make the magical world great again.
Okay.
Essentially.
Right? You went there.
I'm just saying. Like, so it's really essentially, well, what does it mean for us to preserve this lineage of pure magic at the expense and at the expense of the lives of people who are not seen as worthy and valuable of being included in that. Death Eaters are people who are his followers.
Oh, right? Okay.
So the question was, what's the relationship between?
It says, what's the connection, in your opinion, between Death Eaters and white supremacy?
Yeah, exactly. So if we're thinking about the alt-right, if we're talking about people who are the mechanism through which the ideologies of white supremacy function, like that
that is what Death Eaters,
Sure.
Voldemort represented a message. He represented an ethos. He represented an ideology. He represented a stance, right? An orientation in the magical world, that there are certain people that are worthy of full, I wouldn't, in our world, I would say full humanity, and in their world, like full magical,
citizenship or
right,
something like that.
Yeah, something like that. And then there are other people who were not, and then that should be very clear, and we should sort people out accordingly and have them be in a particular place, in a particular social stratum, right? So, the parallel for that with white supremacy is just thinking even about what's going on politically today, right? It's becoming more and more overt, but
Yes,
very
it is.
much right. White supremacy is its ugly head is alive and well, and even though we may have a symbol that just kind of embodies that, the idea that the ethos is out there, and so the mechanisms and the people who endorse and support and perpetuate are existing in our institutions and other spaces of leadership, and are in the service of that message, are in the service of sustaining that ethos. And so that's the relationship that I see.
Okay, that's really interesting. All right, I told her I would give her credit for it. I appreciate that. So, I could ask you other questions, but you know what? We're going to have a link, as I mentioned, in my podcast notes so people can get the book and read it themselves. I don't want them to feel like they got the cliff notes by listening to the podcast. But how do you take care of yourself? So that as you're doing your excavation of self, and you take
that's
care.
A great question.
Sure.
That's a great.
To the extent you're comfortable sharing some of those.
Oh no, I'm happy to share it, because that's the wave I'm on now.
Sure.
I've had a deep shift in my work, and I want to say first, just in light of everything that we're saying, especially to the listeners, like, it's very important to me, nourishing Black joy, Black hope, Black futures, like all of that is so important to me on a global level that it became urgent for me on a personal level. So I believe deeply that what you see publicly is meant to be an overflow of what really occurs in my life privately when nobody's looking. And so my wellness is bound up in my impact, right? So I just wanted to start there. For me, I have learned strategies for meditation and visualization, specifically. Meditation that promotes mind, body, soul integration and connection.
Sure.
Because I'm a deeply spiritual person. Like, I'm a Christian. I've been a Christian since I was 7. And so it's very important to me, even with my own family history. And you get, you grow up and you just like chilling, and then you grow up and you're like, wait a minute. You start noticing things in your family that don't add up. And you start to realize, okay, we got some work to do,
Right.
and you want to be a part of the conversation of healing forward.
Right.
And so for my work personally, I've used meditation and visualization, my relationship with God, and my time spent with Him. Like every morning I have a practice where I engage in those processes where I'm just like really in tune with what's going on with me.
Sure.
And really in tune for me with what's going on beyond the scope of the material world, because I just believe that there's so much more going on and it's so distracting, right?
Right.
So just understand, like, nourishing my calling in that way. And then there's also my health regimen. So I struggled with obesity since I was 8. And so I didn't break that cycle until like 2 years ago. I fluctuated, but I didn't really break it, like with my mind, body, and soul until 2 years ago.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. And so my health regimen is very important to me. So I work out 4 times a week. Every area of my life where I want to prosper, I have a mentor, right? So I have a health mentor, a health coach, right? So because somebody to guide me to the next level, to evolve me. And so I meet with my health coach once a week, and then I take it up the other 3 days. And even in that time, when I'm working out, I'm listening to, for the most part, I listen to a podcast, a sermon, a message, something that will connect this movement of my body with like the wellness of my mind to promote that relationship.
Sure.
And then my eating regimen accordingly is like really strict, because what I realized growing up is that my struggle with obesity was really just underlying stuff that was unresolved, right? Because it didn't have nothing to do with the food. It had to do with what the food was trying to numb.
Right.
And so I changed my relationship with food. And so I am changing my relationship with food, right? It's all ongoing. And so doing that work, you know, so I'm very regimented about what I eat. It's joy in it. It's not a diet.
Right.
It's not, I'm not depriving myself of anything. I am just a healthy person. It's who I am. It's not what I do. You know? And so, wellness is just who I am now.
And that takes commitment when you're traveling. I mean, you must have gotten up very early this morning to land in Madison by mid-morning. So you have to think through those things when you travel.
And that was a big disruptor before, even when I wanted to improve. The traveling was disrupting me, but that's why I had to make a shift. Like, health is not what I do, it's who I am. And it's all bound up in all of this. And the power of Black wellness and humanity and joy is all bound up in my spiritual convictions. Like, I gotta take this is my temple, like, you know. So it's true. So it just had to be like, for me, alignment is important. So
that's so important. And I love that you made the reference to Dr. Lyiscott about treating our bodies as temples, because growing up in church and being a Christian pastor, we'll often talk to people about your body's a temple, so you shouldn't smoke, you shouldn't drink, but we don't talk about obesity. In our circles, we don't talk about hypertension and the things that are caused by food. So I love the fact that you're tying in the truth that if our bodies are a temple, and it's true, then we do need to be conscientious about how we treat it, and not just the big no-nos that we talk about, but what we eat, how we eat, when we eat.
It directly impacts your mind.
Right, it does.
Like, it's like, it does. It's not even like, here's my body and then here's my mind. It's so connected that it's like a must.
Right, we've got to reclaim that. How do you have colleagues on your campus, you know, in your academic circles? Because I just remember, like, we had great scholars. Like, I don't know if the name Nellie McKay means something, but she studied at Yale, but she was in the Afro-Am department. I don't know why she wasn't the department chair. But a brilliant scholar. She wrote the anthology on Black history. And but there weren't many other African-American women in the department. So I think she found her scholarly circles and people who got her and understood her brilliance and Blackness as she traveled, but it wasn't really centralized on this campus. Right. Do you feel like you have a community that helps you stay healthy, stay disciplined, stay real, stay woke, or has social media helped you to build those networks virtually in other places?
You know, so the networks that I am a part of nationally, not through social media, but more so through like national organizations that have different like chapters or special interest groups or divisions that are focused on Blackness or people of color. Those coming up through those as a emerging scholar supported me with building really powerful relationships across the nation. And then my own mentors, where I did my doctoral work, like basically plugged me in. So I have this national network of like really amazing peers, mentors. Like, it's like, you know, it's just, it makes me who I am. Now on campus right now, I would say that there are amazing people on campus that I'm still building relationships with, but in particular, I'm working very closely with Dr. Keisha Green on campus, who is, she's actually in the same College of Education, a different department, but we're working together to launch the Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research. Like, 2 Black women with a center, we're founding it. Right. And, you know, like, so it's like not really it hasn't been a thing, right? So working really closely, and we just had the opportunity to travel to Ghana together. We got a Fulbright to travel to Ghana.
I was there last summer.
Yeah, I heard. So we got a Fulbright to travel this summer. It's going to be 16 of us total. But those of us on the leadership team, we took a 10-day trip to start establishing relationships. And that's when, like, Keisha and I are of the 4 of us on that team, Keisha and I, Dr. Green. Dr. Green and I are the ones that are on at the campus. So, you know, we've been building that relationship, and we got a lot of work together. The 4 of us on that leadership team are from different places and spaces, and we still, like, so it's national. That's good. And everything that you've just described, like, like, they push me forward. They keep me grounded. We think about what it means to disrupt the academy in meaningful ways in the service of our own wellness and the wellness of people who look like us. And I mean, I wouldn't really be here without that kind of support. Yeah.
See, that's exciting to me. My daughter will be finishing up her master's next year. She gave me a call a few weeks ago and said, Dad, I'm thinking about continuing my education. I love the academy, but I wondered about what support there is for Black women, because she's really enjoying grad school way more than undergrad.
Yeah.
But she, I think, is one of 2 Black women who are admitted into the program this year. But as she's thinking about PhD work, I've wondered about the networks of mentors.
Get into those national networks.
Definitely.
And then find the, listen, I talk about, with some colleagues of mine, I talk about the notion of fugitivity as it relates to, especially like the fugitive slave experience, right? And if you really think about what the fugitive slave had to do, the fugitive slave had to move from freedom to freedom within, the enslaved, I'm just
I know what you know.
really
I
trying
got
to
you.
be intentional about my language, right?
Sure.
So the enslaved had to move from spaces of freedom to freedom as a means of survival within a system of white supremacy and oppression that was not built for survival.
Right.
And so a lot of that energy is still in our spirit, still in our DNA. It's still necessary today. When you enter these national organizations that were not built with you in mind, that do not understand what it means to truly honor and sustain who you are, there are spaces within there of agency where other people of color, other Black people have created and disrupted, and you can join those spaces and move from, what will help you to move from safety to safety, from refuge to refuge. That's how I like.
That's a great analogy.
Listen, that's how I got where I am today. Like my whole dissertation committee was Black, right?
What? Wait, what?
Very intentionally, right? Like, because the work, the epistemologies, the orientations, the narrative, like when the gatekeepers are different, then the outcome is different.
Come on now.
You know what I mean?
And what was the topic of your dissertation?
How broken English made me whole.
Wow. That is powerful. I mean, I want our listeners, both Black and non-Black, to just ponder that for just a moment.
Yeah.
It is nothing for a white academician to have an all-white committee. But I've been a part of the committee. I've had adjunct teaching positions. I have never heard of an all-Black committee.
All Black everything.
For a PhD program. That's wild.
Yeah.
And that is disruptive, and that's what's necessary to keep us whole. And I think that this is also important too, Dr. Lyiscott, because Eli and my team and I have been working on a small series for this season that talks about the importance of Black space. And to white listeners, to white people, to white academicians, it sounds like it's reverse, like we're trying to go back into segregation, but they don't realize that campuses by and large are white spaces. Service clubs, Rotary,
everything.
These are white. It's white. The malls, they're white space. It's why when you walk into a place, people turn around and look at you.
Right.
Ice fishing is white space. And so when we say we want that too, it sounds like we're being deviant. We're just trying to be whole and just trying to live. And the plan for integration was never an abdication from our own cultural roots and a separation from it. That we wanted to just not be beaten and lynched and discriminated against. But we never wanted to stop being Black, singing Black, eating Black, dancing Black. We never wanted to stop doing that.
That's the Black appetite that I talk about, that I'm like honing in on. Loving my Blackness is not hating your whiteness.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And it's important for us to nourish this. And the fact that every time we seek to love ourselves, it becomes a threat is just absurd. But
and we have to explain it over and over again.
I won't. I just came from just spending some time with some young Black and brown people who are dealing with a lot of intense racism in their high school right now. And I had to have the conversation with them about what it means, like who to respond to, when to respond, not to respond. I told them, listen, in the most toxic relationships in your life, you will always be explaining yourself away. Our relationship with whiteness is so toxic, I will not explain myself away. I am who I am, right? Wow. And I had to learn that the hard way.
Sure.
That when you find yourself constantly explaining and defending and tiptoe, no. When you have good boundaries and a solid understanding internally of who you are, you become a more powerful being. And that's true for us as a people.
Sure.
Right? Like, we're powerful in our own right. We don't have to explain, justify. What we've had to do is survive.
Right.
So a lot of what we've had to do in order to explain that's survival mechanisms. It's not necessary, for me to justify to you that I want to be with my people.
Right.
Like, why not? There's a million reasons why, but you know, and so just that's
that's powerful.
really important to me.
That's powerful. You know, I've had these crazy conversations with teachers, with parents, where they want to know, well, why are all the the black girls sitting together, the black people sitting together, but they don't notice that 98% of the rest of the school is all sitting together and very homogenous, but they want us to justify why black kids are not purposely diversifying the tables. White kids are doing what they saw in their homes. They're eating with white people. That's what they've done their entire lives. But it looks as if black people aren't offering themselves up, but those folks aren't offering to get up from their tables and come and sit with the black students. So I love what you said, pick your battles, but we can think about our own survival. We don't have to spend all of our time feeding into a toxic machine by explaining what it takes to be ourselves.
And ultimately it's sad. Like, the failure of integration is sad. Race, what we've done with diversity is sad, given that race is socially constructed. Like, the idea that we have really let what could have been beautiful diversity become a toxic hierarchy, that's on us, right? Like, we've robbed ourselves of each other, as far as I'm concerned.
That's very true.
Because the truth is that it would be so beautiful to be in community with each other in meaningful ways. We're human. Right? Like, that's the goal. That's the goal. What it should be. That's the standard. That should be the foundational thing. Right. But there are politics to what it means for a black child to be in a white space. Yes. And so sometimes their emotional survival is hinged on them being with people that look like them.
I know the feeling.
And I'm not, finna sit here and be like, well, go over there and, because no. Like, we've done something that we need to undo, that we need to dismantle, that we need to address in order to make integration true and safe for everybody.
Right. You stated in your book that inclusion shouldn't just be this political effort to make ourselves assuage white guilt by bringing other people in. Right. When you don't understand the beauty of what, say, a black child brings, you rob yourself from that magic that she or he bring to the table. That's what I'm talking about
with this black power, black joy, because black excellence. When we think about this work, is often like, well, okay, how can we let the black people sit at the table? How can we it's not about that. Right. You're missing out, right? Exactly. And I'm talking about all people of color, like, in terms of the way that we don't truly honor diversity, we are robbing ourselves of the brilliance and substance of diversity. That's been my message,
That's a powerful message.
And so this is not about how do we let people, nobody wants to be let into this one very stale standard.
Oh, I love it.
Like, no, like, we need to diversify and evolve. It's interesting because as our world becomes more globalized, as our world becomes more social media saturated, all of the cultural, into popular culture, all of the, it's very obvious how much we need each other, how brilliant and fascinated we find each other. Like, it's all there. Except when it comes to our institutional spaces and when it comes to the gatekeepers, there's still this rigid alignment with white middle class values, this rigid alignment with a very Eurocentric ideological, orientation that is not even real.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And so I think we have some real work to do to disrupt that systemically before we could say anything about actually being diverse, or actually having integration.
Sure. Well, Dr. Lyiscott, I certainly have appreciated this conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
Your insight, your energy, the integration of faith and strength and perspective and history, and your ability to navigate this world with real clear boundaries is an example for so many folks. So I'm going to make sure that not only my daughter listens to this episode, but her crew within the school, the crew, that they're her friends and they're woke folks. But I feel that this will help to speak to some of the things that she needs, not just as an academician, but as a black female in that space that's not always coming up. And so I just love the fact that you've that's the wrong word, that you've explained the necessity for self-care, to have good boundaries. Yes. And you've just been very unapologetically permissive in explaining that it is essential to our health to be who we are, who God created us to be. Yes. And we don't have to spend our whole lives making other people comfortable with our blackness. Yeah. History is is just full of how they have responded to our blackness.
Right.
We don't need this space. We don't need to be in a space now where we're trying to help them to be comfortable with it.
Right.
So I really appreciate it.
Thank you, and I appreciate your work. And this work is just like fire. I really enjoy talking to you.
I enjoy talking with you, and I hope that our paths continue to cross.
Yeah.
Particularly knowing that this is not your first trip to Madison, that there may be others. I have all kinds of ideas in my head. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
And so listen, you all, I want you to help to engage in the work of this brilliant scholar. Get her book and listen to her TED Talk. And so all these links are going to be in the podcast, and share it with your friends, particularly if you are out east and you can follow what she's doing or find out what lectures and things she's giving. Support her, because in doing so, you make yourselves better and stronger. So you're not doing her a favor by coming to her stuff, but you're doing yourself a favor. So again, Dr. Lyiscott, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you.
Ooh, black like me, yeah.
I want to thank Corey Saffold for creating the music for this podcast, my podcast manager, Tyler Nyland, engineer and editor, Eli Steenlich, my editor, Jeremy Holliday, and a special thank you to WORT Studios, where we record Black Like Me.
Ooh, black like me.
Thank you for listening to today's podcast. You can find out more about Dr. Alex G's amazing work at www.alexg.com. Black Like Me is sponsored by the generosity of the Human Family Unity Foundation.